Welcome to The Explainer. We are going to get our heads around the really complex weather story that's unfolding across the UK right now. We're going to look way beyond the daily forecast to really understand why you're feeling that sudden chill, track a pretty potent storm that's heading our way, and then we'll unravel this fascinating atmospheric tug-of-war that could define the rest of our winter.
Okay, so here's what we've got on the cards. We'll start with the immediate bite of winter that's bringing this widespread frost. Then we'll shift our focus to a gathering storm system that's looking to bring some very heavy rain on Thursday. After that, we're going to pull back the curtain on the forecast factory, if you like, to understand how those weather warnings you see are actually put together. And finally, we'll zoom right out to the big picture, this huge continental-scale battle of air masses that is going to shape our weather for the rest of the month.
Right, let's get straight into it, the here and now. After what has felt like a relentlessly mild and wet period for so many of us, you've no doubt felt a very distinct change in the air today. A much colder, crisper air mass has swept in from the northwest, and this is the key player for the next day or two, bringing a totally different feel to our weather.
So what's behind this change? Well, a ridge of high pressure is building across the country. Now, in simple terms, that means the air is sinking, which leads to calmer conditions and, really importantly, clearer skies for many tonight. But here's the thing about clear skies. They're beautiful, but they act like an open window, just letting any warmth from the day radiate straight out into space. With that colder air already in place, it is the absolute perfect recipe for a sharp and widespread frost. That's going to create some pretty tricky icy patches on untreated surfaces come morning. This table here, it just neatly captures that really sharp 48-hour transition. You'll notice the yellow ice warning for Scotland. That's where any wintry showers falling on ground that's already below zero could create some quite hazardous conditions. For most of England and Wales, though, the main story is that widespread frost, with the potential for some really dense patches of freezing fog that could stick around well into Wednesday morning, causing all sorts of issues for commuters. But look ahead to Wednesday afternoon, you can see that's when the next chapter starts, as cloud and rain begin to push in from the Atlantic, and that signals the end of this brief cold snap.
And just how cold could it get? Well, for most of us in towns and cities, we're probably looking at temperatures just a few degrees below freezing. But in sheltered rural spots, particularly the Scottish glens, something special happens. The cold, dense air drains down the hillsides and it pools in the valleys overnight. In those spots, the mercury could plummet towards a truly bone-chilling -10 Celsius. It's a stark reminder that even within a generally changing pattern, you can always get these pockets of severe winter cold in the right locations.
Okay, so that's the cold snap sorted, but let's now track the next major weather player on the horizon. That band of rain arriving late on Wednesday is really just the opening act for a much more potent area of low pressure, which is forecast to sweep right across the UK through Thursday.
And this is the central question, the real head-scratcher for forecasters right now. We know a low-pressure system is coming. We know the jet stream is giving it energy, causing it to deepen as it barrels across the Atlantic. The uncertainty, as is so often the case a few days out, is all in the fine details. You see, different computer models are suggesting slightly different tracks and depths for the storm's center, and a shift of just 50 miles can make all the difference between a windy, wet day and a genuinely disruptive one.
And here we see that classic forecasting dilemma in action. In one corner, you've got the Met Office's own high-resolution model, the UKV, which takes the low further east. In the other corner, you have the highly regarded global model from the European Centre, or ECMWF. It's currently projecting a track further west. Now, that westerly track is really significant because it would give the storm more time over the sea to intensify, potentially bringing stronger winds to western areas. The forecaster's job is to weigh the outputs of these different models and many others to figure out what's the most probable outcome.
So while there's a bit of a question mark over the wind, there is much higher confidence about the rain. Whatever its exact track, this system is tapping into a plume of really moist Atlantic air, making it incredibly wet. And this rain is going to be falling on ground that is already completely saturated after a very wet start to the year. The ground is like a full sponge. There's simply nowhere for the water to go, and that raises the risk of surface water flooding and some pretty significant travel disruption. That's why a yellow warning for rain is already in place for large parts of southern and western Britain, with some spots potentially seeing up to 70 millimeters. That's nearly 3 inches of rain in just one day.
You know, this very uncertainty about Thursday's storm, it gives us the perfect opportunity to peek behind the curtain. How do forecasters take all this complex, sometimes conflicting data and turn it into a simple warning that we can all understand? Let's use the recent Storm Goretti as a case study to really unpack how the National Weather Warning System actually works. Right.
The first and most important thing to get your head around is that a weather warning isn't just about the weather itself, it's about its impact. For instance, 60-mile-an-hour winds in August, when all the trees are in full leaf and they act like giant sails, can cause far more disruption than the exact same wind speed in the depths of winter on bare trees. The warning isn't triggered by a number on a chart. It's triggered when that weather is expected to have a real, tangible effect on people's lives and infrastructure. Context, as they say, is everything. And this is the tool forecasters use to make that call, the warnings matrix. It looks simple, but it's incredibly important. On one axis, you have the potential impact of the weather, from low to high. On the other, you've got the likelihood, or basically the forecaster's confidence, that those impacts are actually going to happen. The familiar yellow, amber, or red color of a warning is determined entirely by where an event falls on this grid.
So let's apply this to the real-world example of Storm Goretti. The first warning that went out was a broad yellow for snow. The potential impact was assessed as medium. Things like travel delays, power cuts was certainly possible. However, there was a lot of uncertainty about the exact line between the rain and the snow, which meant the likelihood of those impacts happening anywhere in that big area was low. So, on the matrix, medium impact plus low likelihood equals a yellow warning. And you can see that reflected in the cautious wording, using phrases like possible and could.
But then, things changed. As the storm got closer, new data allowed forecasters to pinpoint a much smaller, more specific area where heavy snow was almost a certainty. Now, notice the key shift on the matrix here, because this is the clever bit. The potential impact stayed medium. The same travel delays were expected. But for this smaller area, the likelihood of those impacts actually happening was upgraded to medium. And that combination, medium impact and medium likelihood, is what triggers an amber warning. The official wording then switched from possible to likely, signaling that increased confidence to everyone. The severity of the weather hadn't changed, but the confidence had.
Right, now let's pull the camera way, way back. Forget the next few days for a moment, and let's look at the bigger, hemispheric picture for next week. There is a fascinating atmospheric battle setting up, and the outcome of this is going to dictate whether winter truly returns to the UK. This, right here, is the fundamental conflict that will drive our weather for the rest of the month. To our west, we have the Atlantic Ocean, this huge source of heat and moisture, constantly trying to send mild, wet, and windy systems our way. But to our east, a vast block of intensely cold, dense, and dry air has built up over Scandinavia and Siberia, far from any warming influence of the sea. For the next week or so, the UK is going to be the battleground in this massive atmospheric tug-of-war. So, what decides who wins this battle? Well, it all comes down to the jet stream and a chain reaction that actually started thousands of miles away over the Pacific. A few days ago, an explosive storm there sent this huge pulse of energy rippling east through the atmosphere. When that energy hit North America, it forced the jet stream to buckle into a massive northward bulge, or what we call a ridge. Think of this ridge as a giant mountain in the atmosphere. The jet stream has to flow around it, and as it comes down the other side over the Atlantic, it creates a deep southward plunge aimed right at us in the UK. This is what's going to slow our weather right down and effectively open the door to that cold continental air. And this chart shows the most likely outcome of that big change in the jet stream. This is what's known as an ensemble forecast. Instead of just running a computer model once, forecasters run it hundreds of times with slightly different starting conditions to get a much better sense of all the possibilities. And looking at over 250 of these simulations for the end of next week, the results are pretty stark. A mild, wet Atlantic-driven pattern is considered very, very unlikely. Instead, the most probable scenarios all involve a colder wind coming in from the continent. So the question is no longer if it will turn colder, but how cold it's actually going to get.
So after all that meteorology, what is the bottom line? What does this all mean for you over the next 1 to 2 weeks? Let's break down the crucial points and put it all together.
All right, here is your weather checklist for the coming days. In the immediate short term, the main things to watch for are frost and ice. Then on Thursday, the focus shifts completely to heavy rain and the risk of flooding that comes with it. As we head into the weekend, the pattern changes again. With that jet stream weakening, our weather becomes much more stagnant, which means gray, murky, and foggy conditions for a lot of us. And then, looking ahead to next week, the signal is really strong for colder than average weather, but with that big question mark still hanging over exactly how cold it might get. This quote from the Met Office Outlook just sums up the situation perfectly. This is absolutely not a done deal. The atmosphere is in this incredibly delicate state of balance, with these two giant air masses just pushing back and forth. The phrase waxing and waning refers to that daily battle.
One computer model run might favor the Atlantic, the very next one might favor the continent. A tiny shift in the position of that high pressure to our east could be the difference between a chilly, cloudy week and a genuinely cold, snowy one. And that leaves us with this final thought. We've had a very unsettled start to the year already, but with that vast reservoir of intensely cold air just sitting there so close by over the continent, the potential is certainly there for a significant and much more prolonged cold spell as we head towards the end of January. Thanks for joining this explainer.